As soon as Lisa came in the door, I took one look at her, and somehow I knew. I knew that my wife had cheated. She had told me that she had to work late, maybe she did, but somehow I knew she had done more than work. How did I know? Part of it was just intuition, and part of it was the look on her face and the nervous way she moved when she got home that night. Lisa was a terrible poker player. For my part, I have a good poker face, and I didn't let on that I suspected that my wife of 5 years had done anything wrong. What I did do was hire a private investigator. I wanted proof. Lisa and I were both 27. I met her during our senior year of college. We dated for 2 years before getting married. One thing that I thought we had in common was our values and that we believed in total fidelity to each other. I had made it clear before we tied the knot that cheating was definitely a deal breaker. The sad thing was that up until now, I had thought we had a perfect life. I'm not one of those guys who is so focused on his career that he ignores his wife. On the contrary, I was always buying her flowers and little presents. I took her out and wined and dined her. And she never lacked intimacy, as I have a pretty high drive. I've been told I'm good-looking and I work out to keep in shape. Yeah, I'm sure I have my flaws, but taking care of my wife wasn't one of them. Lisa wasn't what would be termed a stone-cold fox, but she was pretty and had a nice figure. She had curves in the right place. Lisa worked as a paralegal for a prestigious law firm. She was usually home at the end of the workday, but occasionally had to work late on an important case. I work in the high-tech industry and make a good living. Lisa came from a fairly wealthy family. Her dad owned a large ranch in Texas on which oil had been found. He had insisted that we sign a prenuptial agreement. Included in it was that in the event of divorce, none of the assets we had prior to our marriage could be touched, and further, any inheritance from family was likewise exempt. I wasn't marrying her for money, so I had no problem signing. I never cared for her dad, as he was a devout racist, always disparaging blacks and Mexicans. At least I didn't see that trait in Lisa, and since we lived a long distance from them and didn't spend time around them, I was fine. The private investigator that I hired was the one a buddy of mine had used to get the dirt on his cheating wife. He had been impressed with how efficient this guy was. Anyway, the day after I first suspected something was wrong, I was in the private investigator's office telling him what I wanted, and once he accepted my retainer, he went to work on the case. It took my wife a few days after what I thought was her first time to cheat to return to normal. I had continued to act the role of the loving husband, and she obviously thought she had got away with it. It was exactly a week later that I got the call from her that she had to work late again. I called the private investigator and let him know. Again, when she got home, she looked somewhat guilty. Not as bad as the first time, so I guess she was getting used to the idea I wouldn't find out, and she could do as she saw fit. I got a call from the investigator the next day that confirmed my suspicions. She was screwing some guy she worked with, and they were doing it right in the offices after everyone else had left for the day. Apparently, he had some photos made through the window from the building across the street, but they weren't all that clear. He asked me if I wanted him to continue on the case, and I asked him if he could get them on video. He said it could be done, but it would cost more. I wasn't hurting for cash, so I told him it was covered and to get it done. As for me, I came down with a stomach virus that kept me from having intimacy with my wife. Or at least that was what I told Lisa. I only hoped I hadn't already got an STD from her. I then set my plan in motion. I guess one of my faults is that I like to play poker. I would get together maybe once a month with some buddies to play. I usually came out ahead, so I thought for an amateur I wasn't bad. I also played poker online. Nothing big, just $5 and $10 buy-in games. We had built up a nest egg of a little over 200 grand, and since I contributed the most, I didn't want Lisa to have any part of it. That's where online poker came in. With my knowledge and skills, I set up 5 untraceable accounts on a poker site to work through. All accounts were mine, so I was able to play myself in head-to-head matches and lose to myself. Yeah, I lost some to the site, taking a rake for each game. but it was less than what Lisa would get in a divorce. It would be less suspicious if I lost all our money to 5 other players than to just one. The site I played, of course, wasn't based in the US and wasn't likely to give up any information on their clients. It took a week, but by then I had cleaned our bank accounts of all but 10 grand. Once again, exactly 1 week to the day, Lisa called and said she had to work late, and I called the private investigator to let him know. He told me he had it covered. This time, when my wife got home, there was hardly any trace of guilt. She was getting good at cheating. The next morning, I got the call from the private investigator, and he said he had what I wanted. I headed for his office and picked up the DVD. He told me he could have a written report in a couple of days if I wanted it, but I told him that this should be enough. I paid him for his time and told him I would call if I needed anything more. He told me he was sorry about the way things turned out. I laughed and told him he had no reason to be sorry. He wasn't the one cheating on me. I took the DVD and went back to work and locked myself into my office, telling my assistant that I didn't want to be disturbed. I noticed I wasn't nervous when I clicked play. Hell, I already knew she was messing around with me, and it wasn't like this was going to change anything. The video had obviously been shot from a hidden camera in the law office. It had a high-quality picture as well as sound. I don't know how the private investigator pulled it off, and I don't want to. All I cared about was that I had what I wanted. I had never met the guy my wife was being intimate with, but the private investigator had provided me with a lot of information on him. I knew he was married with 2 children. I knew who his parents were and where he grew up. I knew where he went to church with his family. What I hadn't known and only learned when I watched the video was that the guy was black. I hadn't seen the first pictures the private investigator took as I wanted video, and the private investigator hadn't mentioned the fact that my wife's lover was black. Now I know what you are thinking. She went after a big black Johnson. Well, when I saw him, I noticed he wasn't any more hung than I was. Maybe even a little smaller than me. I watched the video with total detachment. I had already lost all feelings for her. I know guys who had been in my position and had become emotional basket cases. They wanted to know why their wife had done this to them. Personally, I didn't care. She had done it, and that was all that mattered. I sure didn't care why. One thing I did notice was that there was no mention of me or his wife while they were together. The intimacy wasn't all that interesting. A little and straight to the point. The one thing that did stand out was them running down the partners of the law firm. Interesting. After I watched the video, I went to my boss and told him that I needed a week off to handle personal business. We were pretty good friends, and I gave him the basic idea of what was going on and asked him to help cover for me. I told him I needed to be out of town for several days. He had caught his ex-wife cheating on him 2 years ago and was very sympathetic. He said he could do better than that. He gave me a list of some customers out of state that he thought it would be nice if I made a call on. That way, I had a legitimate reason to be gone and I wouldn't even have to use vacation time. I took off early and went home and packed a suitcase. I called my wife and told her that one of our customers out of state had a major emergency with their computer systems, and I had to go out of town to deal with it. This wasn't anything totally unusual, as I did occasionally travel on business, but not very often. She told me she loved me and would miss me and to hurry home. I simply said I had to rush to catch my flight. I don't know if she picked up on the fact that I hadn't told her I loved her too. I caught a flight out of state and set about completing the next stage of my plan. I made a bunch of copies of the video and then put them into mailers and addressed them. To have plausible deniability that I had anything to do with them, I overnighted them to an old college friend who lived on the East Coast. I had called him and asked for a favor. I told him he would receive a box that I had sent next day delivery. All he had to do was open it and take each mailer and drop them in the mail so the postmark showed where they were sent from. I was halfway across the country with witnesses as to my location and where I was working. Yeah, I know it all sounds a bit cloak and dagger, and if things worked out as I suspected, it was overkill, but I just wanted to make sure what I was doing wasn't traced back to me. I had a video sent to every person I could find the name of, who worked for the law firm that Lisa worked for. Others were sent to the wife, parents, and pastor of his church. There was one sent to my wife's parents and to the preacher where they attended church, and copies to every one of her old friends I could find an address for. I also had them sent to all of our current friends. Now, I know a lot of guys would be embarrassed to have their friends know that their wives messed around on them. Not me. She was the cheating woman who had broken her vows. I was the innocent victim. The last one was sent to my home and addressed to me. With each video was a list of amateur sites where I had anonymously posted it for all to see. By Thursday, the shit began to hit the fan. I don't know all the details, but my wife and her lover were called into their boss's office, shown the video, and summarily fired. Next, my wife started receiving phone calls from her friends who had seen the video. Her dad called her and screamed over the phone at her and told her never to contact him or her mother ever again. On Friday, I got a call from a couple of our friends on my mobile asking if I knew about the videos. I told them I was out of town working and didn't know what they were talking about. They clued me in on to what was happening. It was nice to know that some of my friends were more loyal than my wife. I called my house, and a very nervous-sounding Lisa answered the phone. I told her about the calls from our friends about the video. I then told her I was on my way to the airport to fly home, and that if what I had heard was true, she had better be gone by the time I got home and to get a lawyer. She was gone when I got home. She had packed up some clothes and not much else. I found out later that she had a divorced friend who was letting her stay with her. As it happens, her friend was divorced for being a cheating woman. I contacted a lawyer and set the divorce in motion. I told Lisa I never wanted to see her again, and the only contact I would have with her was through our lawyers. Lisa's lawyer was a pathetic sleazebag. After everything had gone public, most lawyers didn't want to have anything to do with her. I guess her ex-employer had put out the word that she was persona non grata. When I listed our assets at 10 grand, she had a fit. Of course, I had enough evidence to prove I had gambled away the rest and had done so before I knew of her cheating. Our only other asset was the house, but with the decline in the real estate market, we were going to be upside down when it was sold. We had only been living there for 3 years. Lisa didn't understand that and got a court order to sell the house and split the proceeds. I didn't care as I had no plans to stay in the house anyway, and she couldn't afford the payments being out of work. I had to pay 8 grand to pay off the rest of the mortgage after the house sold, so our net worth was now listed at 2 grand. She also sued for alimony. The final judgment was that it was her fault she was not working, but she had the ability to work and alimony was denied. I gave her a check for $1,000. She owed more than that to her lawyer. She had screwed herself and now she was broke, virtually left without any friends and with no family to turn to. She also knew that she would never work in our city again, as this had become a widely known scandal. She had no choice but to move out of state. I threatened to sue the law firm that Lisa had worked for on the grounds that they should have known what was going on between 2 employees who were married to other people, and they were doing it in their offices, apparently, on company time. I settled for 300 grand, which they willingly paid to get the mess over with. They didn't want any more publicity to tarnish their reputation any more than it had been. I cashed out my accounts from the online poker site and recouped most of my money. Along with the money from the settlement with the law firm, I came out rather well financially. I would have given it all away to have still had a loving and faithful wife, but I couldn't change that. What I do know of Lisa over the last couple of years is that she works as a waitress and is struggling to get by. It seems that any time she applied for a better job, a copy of her infamous video would mysteriously arrive at the company she applied to. I guess a cheating wife who messes in the office while on the clock and speaks disparagingly of her employers does not go over well on her resume. As for me, well, I know a few ladies who are friends with benefits. Will I get married again? Maybe, who knows? My parents and both of my grandparents have had good, long-lasting marriages. Maybe I'll get lucky and meet the right woman. Of course, I will let her know how I feel about cheating, even though it hasn't done much for Lisa and me. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.